Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Mayor's Show. This is a show I do periodically on CCTV and Town Meeting TV, which I'm so grateful that they host this so that the City of Burlington information can get out to more folks through this great community resource. So on my show today, I'm Emma Mulvaney-Stanek, the Mayor of Burlington. On today's show, we're going to talk with one of my department heads, Bill Ward, who is the director of our Department of Permitting and Inspections, or DPI. This department has a few different roles, and I'll ask him to explain that in a minute and introduce himself, because Bill's actually had a really interesting long years of service to the City of Burlington, for which we're very grateful for. And it's actually an interesting story just in and of itself. But we'll cover a lot of interesting topics today on mostly problem properties, but again, the larger scope of what DPI covers. And today, we're going to try a new thing on this show. We're going to use the call-in function, which I'm actually quite excited about. So I'm going to give you the number so you can write it down, and then I'll cue when we'll start taking calls, and they'll queue them up on hold if you're interested. We'll try to keep questions to the topic on hand tonight: problem properties, code enforcement, those kinds of housing and other related issues that Bill will mention in just a minute in more detail and hopefully spark some good questions. But that phone number is 802-862-3966. That's again 802-862-3966. And when we get to the questions in a few minutes, I will do my best to facilitate this. First time for me, but I'm really excited to hear if people out there are watching live will have questions. And since many of you might also be seeing this recorded, you can always reach out to the city, to the mayor's office. We have all of our information up on our website, and Bill will certainly also share direct contact information to connect with DPI, especially on code enforcement issues, which is I will ask him a few questions, especially for tenants, renters out there who might have some specific curiosities on what you all do. So Bill, thanks for being on the show. We were just talking, I think you're like the third department head or so, or fourth, that I've had on this Mayor's Show. Can you just introduce yourself a little bit and your history of the city just to get started?
Sure. So I'm Bill Ward, and I'm the Director of Permitting Inspections, as the Mayor had said. But I've been in this position 16 years this month. So it's a nice anniversary month for me. It was January of 2010 when I started. But before that, I was a police officer in Burlington and served 22 and a half, almost 23 years. So started in 1987. I know a lot about the city. I think the city knows a lot about me. It's really helped my career because I've got a great depth of knowledge of all the different areas of the city, a lot of the quirkiness that comes with some of the different street and ordinance challenges that we can have. And it's also given me a great opportunity to meet so many of the residents, people that are business owners, property owners, tenants here. And it really is a great city to be a part of and to work for. I've really enjoyed it. That's why it's 39 years now. So I'm really excited to be here with you and share some of the information about what's happening and what's new in the Department of Permitting and Inspections.
Well, that's really great. Bill, thank you for 39 years of service to the City of Burlington. That's no small feat. I mean, serving in public roles and in any government, city, local, state, or federal, is really, I always find, a deep act of love for community and public service. And so it's noted by me. I just really appreciate that. So first of all, if we say nothing else today, thank you for that, because it's a good modeling to all the people out there that careers in public service matter, and they're so important for our local communities functioning. So let's start with talking a little bit about DPI. So DPI has not even been a department for as long as departments like CEDO or Department of Public Works or other things that people might be familiar with. So let's talk first with what is Department of Public Permitting and Inspections, and what's the scope of work for this department?
Sure. So I'll start with where I was in 2010, and from that point forward, the Department of Code Enforcement, as it was referred to, handled all housing-related issues. So it was primarily the housing inspectors and problems with neighborhoods with either yard parking or with trash or other disorder, things like that were not quite at the level of the police department, but code enforcement handled all of those things and inspected the 10,000 plus now rental units in the city on a routine and on a complaint basis. But there was a time when the city realized by 2019 they needed to create a much broader department that included the enforcement piece of what we were doing at code enforcement. That included zoning enforcement. So we didn't have the permit folks from zoning as part of our department, and we didn't have the trades folks from Department of Public Works as part of our team. And because the permits connect both the building trades and the zoning together, and we were the enforcement arm to wrap it all together at the end, it really did make sense that one department should be a one-stop shop to put it all together. So in 2010, the council passed the resolution, which then went to the voters for a charter change, and then we became a chartered department as the Department of Permitting Inspections. So it is those three divisions: housing, the zoning division, and then the building trades division.
Well, that's great. And I think the other thing that I was always, I grew up in central Vermont. Many people don't realize that individual cities, even slightly larger towns in Vermont, don't have that housing code enforcement component of it. Can you speak a little bit, in case other folks are just curious? That is unique to Burlington, and that was a conscious investment by this city to make sure that our housing stock had a minimum standard and that we weren't reliant on the state to do that level of inspection for us. So is there anything there that would just be, you think people would be interested to know about how we differ from the state?
Yeah, I think it was in the 80s when it was first developed, and it wasn't a formal department. It was simply created by resolution as code enforcement, but it wasn't a real chartered department. So code enforcement in Burlington is really a way for the city to have some control over tenant issues. So if tenants had a problem with properties, if there was a violation at their property, they would typically have to go to either the property owner, who, if they fixed it, great. If they didn't, they would have had to turn to either legal aid, or I can't remember if CEDO was available to provide some sort of tenant resources back then. But the truth was, there needs to be some direct connection that brings together the property owners and the tenants, so that both can feel like my side has been heard, and the department looked at what the truth of the ordinance was, not whether something was a complaint or not, because you can have a complaint and not have it be justified. Our job is to go and see that the complaint is a violation of the minimum housing ordinance, and then give direction to the property owner to say, in addition to this being a violation, this is the ordinance that covers it, and this is the specific thing that you need to do to remedy that violation. We send an order, and we give a written report to the property owner to tell them, these are the things that need to be fixed, and here's when you need to fix them by. And then we go back, typically in a 30-day period, to confirm that those things are corrected. If they're not, there's a penalty associated with it, with a reinspection fee, potentially a ticket. That's where the enforcement part comes in. And that's where my experience as a police officer comes in, because the team, I don't think, did a lot of enforcement. They just asked. And sometimes you can ask and ask and ask, but unless you're prepared to have a consequence, you're not always going to get good results.
Right. And there's a lot of rental properties in the city of Burlington, so it is very important. I've often heard the statistic around 60% of Burlingtonians rent in some capacity. So that's a really important part of our constituency that we serve. And also, code is not just a complaint-based process, though. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the annual inspections and reviews that are on a standard process? So, because I know I live in the Old North End, and I know there's often dynamics where people are afraid to complain. They're afraid to change, because it's a power imbalance, I would say, between landlord and tenant often, and then especially folks with limited incomes can get worried about rent increases, other things that could happen if they call to complain about black mold or broken doors or whatever it might be. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the other elements of our inspection process that are a little bit more routine that aren't just waiting for someone to call for a complaint?
Yes. That's a really great question, because I think of it from the perspective of what we do. Those are the things that people are questioning typically, because they want, if there's a problem, they want to call with a complaint. But we don't wait for those. If there's not complaints, we're always doing routine inspections, as that's what you were describing, Mayor. With a routine inspection, what we're doing is we're going through every property. We're going to look at every rental property on a minimum of I'm going to say, on a typical inspection, it's 3 years, but it could be as far out as 5 years from the day we inspect. If on that initial inspection we find no violations, what the inspector will do is, that's a great property. If we find no violations, there are probably close to 400 different potential deficiencies. If the inspector didn't find anything, you really hit a high bar. We give up to a 5-year certificate, meaning we won't, unless there's a complaint, typically be back for 5 years. The process is reduced. If there are some violations that need to get corrected, it drops to a 4-year certificate. If there are more than 5 deficiencies that need to be corrected, it drops to a 3-year certificate, only when the deficiencies are corrected. And then if they're not fixed within the time that we ask, you can only get a 2-year certificate, meaning it's a trust thing. If we ask you to fix it by a certain date and the tenant didn't get it corrected, we'll issue a 2-year certificate to that property. And a 1-year certificate is sort of reserved for the worst case scenario where there's so many things that had gone wrong before the inspection that even when they're corrected, we're going to give a 1-year certificate because we want to make sure that that property is not going to fall back into a poor compliance state within that 1-year period.
Right.
So as we do that, we'll issue a new certificate each time we go back and inspect. But on average, I would say most of the properties, over 80%, get a 4 or a 5-year certificate, which is really says a lot about property owner management. Their property owners are doing a great job. As you know, probably with other problems, the real challenge comes with the other, 5 to 10% who can really be a problem for both the tenants and for our team, and then the city attorney's office and the housing board.
Right.
So there's quite a slew of
Yep.
cascading problems that can happen from that, and that does drag down our potential to inspect all the properties as quickly as we want to, but we're always trying to find efficiencies and make it better.
I think it is also so important because it's one thing to create ordinances and to try to offer more service to folks, especially renters, than the state could provide a town. But they mean nothing if you don't enforce. And so making sure that we have consistency, that it's known that even if it is really the 5 to 10% of landlords that might be repeat issues that we're trying to address, continuing to be tenacious on that and making sure people have a minimum housing code that's met in the city of Burlington really means something, and it hopefully will encourage others to be in compliance because that is something that the city values and puts resources behind. Before I go on my next question, I just remind folks that we're trying a new thing tonight. We're going to do the call-in number. So that number again is 802-862-3966. That's a number you can call and ask a question live on the air, and I'll do my best to figure out how to do that correctly. Again, 802-862-3966. If you have questions around housing, how we do our code enforcement, we're going to get into some blighted, problematic properties in a minute here. But I also, one thing I learned since being mayor is that we have our own review process for any rental unit in the city of Burlington. But there are some folks in our community who are low income who benefit from Section 8 vouchers, and that's a HUD, that's a federal program, and they actually do as I understand it, a second review of that kind of standard of housing, which I think is beneficial for folks to know. But it is important that people know there is a local review as well, as the city of Burlington is not just the federal government who's charged of making sure that, especially when we are subsidizing, very importantly, the housing for low-income people, that there is another review. All right, so you actually just briefly mentioned, I think actually, well, let me stop and give you a little commercial moment. So if I were a tenant, if I were a renter, and I was just moved to town, I remember I always use this as an example. My cousin has moved on now, and I will not use the address, but one of her last apartments as a UVM student, I was so shocked. I was already mayor, and I almost called Bill immediately to say, like, we need to check out this property because the apartment she moved into had a questionable shower. It looked like the floor might be slightly, unstable and having some issues with holes into the basement. Unfortunately, that can happen in rental properties or any other kind of examples of things that are just not up to the standards we expect. How would a tenant go about contacting the city? And can you sort of walk people through what that process might be if they call, especially if they're nervous about some of those dynamics with their landlord? How would I go about just getting some basic information and or filing a complaint? Like, what parts are public record or not? I'm just curious if you can walk someone through what that would be like.
Well, I would say if it was a student, they're probably going to find the website is pretty user-friendly, so they'll find that an easy way to go to the city website and then find the link for permitting and inspections and housing. But generally speaking, if you call or use that link, you're going to be asked some questions. We obviously need to know the property address, what you are saying the problem is. we typically want to know that the property owner is aware of it, and if they've been given an opportunity to fix it, and if it's still unsatisfactory to you, that's the reason for us to go. The challenge, though, is if someone called us and said, I don't have any heat, we're really not the first place someone should go. If you don't have heat, you should be calling your property owner or property manager. We'll help you, but we're going to be doing that immediately to get the heat corrected. But a person that you talk to, if you call, will want someone on our team. I'll give the number, 863-0442 is the office number, and my number's in the on the website as well, but that number is 865-7510. Either of those numbers is fine. I'm the health officer for the city of Burlington, and I get those calls when they're referred from the state of Vermont as the health officer. And that health officer connection is specifically because it's housing related, right? Most health issues with housing are related to rental housing. But a person would call our office, we'd get the address, we'd get the condition, some contact information for that person so that we know when the inspector arrives, we can have them call to speak with whoever at that address if they don't answer the door, just to confirm that we're going at the right time and the right place to meet them and see the condition. We don't go in a unit unless we either have the tenant's permission or the property owner's permission. So we usually need some way to connect with a tenant when they're making a report so that it can take us right to where the problem is and say, it's this area right here, this is what I'm concerned about. The inspector may look at other things too to make sure that smoke and CO detection or there's a fire extinguisher in place, some of the basic life safety things. But I think they would find, if they called, a pretty friendly process where we would explain what their rights are, and anyone who doesn't get satisfaction has the right to appeal either the code official's decision, or if the property owner doesn't like what we do, they can appeal that to the Housing Board of Review. So again, I feel like it's fairly straightforward, and if there are questions at any point, folks can ask us. We're not unfriendly in any way. If there's a question, they can simply just say, what does this mean? Or how do I do this?
Right.
We're always there.
And they can call that number and just get basic information without formally having to file a complaint and start the whole process, which I think is really helpful, especially if you're new to Burlington or new to this process, and know that we have, it's a friendly local person answering the phone who is happy to answer, yes, that is something, just so you know, and then the person could take the next step if they want to, basically, with the complaint. You've mentioned the Housing Review Board a couple times. Can you explain what that is and how that interfaces with everything that DPI does? And then once we do that, we'll start going into blighted properties, because I know we get a lot of questions like that related to blighted properties and vacant buildings at the mayor's office. And I'd love to spend our second half of our time together talking about that. Let me do the plug for the number one more time before we do Housing Review Board. I'm just trying to get like a TV host job, so I want to show that I can do the telethon thing, right? So if you have questions for Bill or myself, 802-862-3966 if you want to call in and be part of this conversation, 802-862-3966. You could even give us a scenario about if you're a tenant and you have a thing that you've always been wondering, is that a code violation? We can put Bill on the spot and see if he would be able to offer some advice. So the Housing Review Board, what is that?
So it's like most other citizen committees in the city that's made up of, in this case, 5 residents of the city of Burlington, and they typically have some connection with rental housing, either through being a tenant themselves or some connection with property ownership. They are the independent review board for security deposit appeals when there's a dispute between tenants and property owners. Tenants should be getting those notices when they move out that there's a security deposit being refunded or being held. Those things, there's an appeal notice right within it to contact the city attorney's office. If either party is aggrieved, they can appeal that. But the appeals from my team really come from, in most cases, a property owner. On a rare occasion, a tenant is dissatisfied and they'll appeal, but I can only think of 2 times in the time I've been there for the last 16 years now that it's been a tenant. In most cases, a property owner thinks we either were too tough on them or we got it wrong. We asked them to fix something that was not part of the code. Our reputation and our batting average is pretty solid. We're really careful to make sure that we either meet the code or that we are explaining what needs to be done. But it's a free country. People have a right to appeal. And this panel hears both sides. They hear why the person is aggrieved, and then they hear from the code staff to say what's your side of things, and then they meet privately and they'll make a decision and issue a written decision and an order that both sides are actually held to, or if they still are aggrieved with the board, they can appeal that to Superior Court. Like I said, in every place, in every part of this country, there's appeals to things. That's the process.
That's great. Well, I know that it's hard in city government sometimes, because sometimes we're so in the weeds and everything feels like it's just endless piles of work and problem solving that we have to do. But you had some great success stories, and I'm going to ask you a couple times this question because I think it's important for folks to know. And I know right around when I became mayor, there was a very well-known property. It actually made, I think, a 7 Days headline or two at the lower block of Church Street. I think it's a good example of how the Housing Review Board can engage, and I really want to emphasize what Bill said before. It's 5 members of Burlington residents who actually serve on this board, and it's something that we're always looking for applicants. It's a great way to do public service yourself as a volunteer, and if you care about housing and fairness and giving people due process, it's a great way to get involved. So tell us a little bit about that property on Lower Church Street, because it was notorious. It had a lot of issues going on, and I think it's a good story about like how, again, the city tracks these things. Sometimes things take a while because, again, due process is a thing in this country. At least here in Vermont it is still, and here in Burlington it certainly is. But can you just explain that as kind of like a mini case, and then kind of what happened there? And then I promise we will get to blighted properties.
No, I'm going to help you, because it's also going to be a property we can make a nice segue, because it became vacant because of our enforcement. But essentially, we were getting reports from the police and the fire department that there were just an astronomical number of calls, and there were complaints to the administration about it. Our team knew from some complaints from individual tenants, and we already had some open inspection issues there, but we hadn't really looked at the totality of the property to include the fire issues, the problems with people being in the building that shouldn't be there. So we pulled together both the police and the fire department, and I used the certificate of compliance process, sending that property before the housing board. They upheld our decision, and ultimately the property needed to be effectively shut down so that it could be brought back up into full compliance. That's the shorter version of it. But once it got shut down, it actually became a vacant building. I think it's a success story, because it's still in the vacant building process, but it's received an exemption for the first year while they were doing some pretty major renovations. I'm going to say it's somewhere well over $200,000 of renovations. There's a complete gut of the inside of that building. They're putting in new electrical, new plumbing, new everything. It's going to be really a great spot when it's done. And they're maintaining the same 17 units that were there, which is really good for Burlington. I know we need the units of housing all the time. So yeah, that was a success story from start to finish, really, because it took a problem property. Now it's a full-time construction zone, and it won't be long because that'll be reoccupied. That's the purpose of all of these things working together, and ultimately the vacant building ordinance on that is tracking it to see that it comes to a proper end result. Right.
And if I could edit my own show, I would take my wah-wah out. It was wah-wah for a brief moment, because there also was an important part of the story is that the property changed hands in terms of who owned it, which was a big game changer as well. So those who are rehabbing the building are not the same people who were owning it when it was in disrepair and an issue property. And that is really truly why it's a success story, because sometimes the right property owner it's just a bad formula and a bad equation for everybody. And then this could be a process that could lead to a changing of hands of who's actually owning the property, and then ideally bringing it back into not only proper use, but rehabbing much needed housing units that we need in the city. So there are more blighted properties though in the city, and something that you and I have been starting to really grapple with, and some new fresh thinking is like, okay, so what do we do, and how do we start tackling blighted properties? Because it could be defined in a number of ways. So how have we started to think about just how do you define a blighted property, a vacant building? Because they're not all the same. They don't all have the same factors about them. So how are we starting to approach this?
Well, I'm going to give you a plug first, because this really came from your suggestion that we review what Lawrence, Massachusetts did with their sort of plan for tackling and their task force for tackling blighted properties. But Burlington's got its own little twist on it. Thanks to me, I would like to have our own little twist. But we've got, what we're tracking are both vacant properties and what I'm calling distressed properties. So the vacant properties are the ones that are actually unoccupied. So unoccupied, there's a few different ways, but the standard typically is 210 days by ordinance is what makes a property vacant per the vacant building ordinance. There was a recent update last spring so that now if it's been vacant for longer than a month and it's got multiple violations, it can still be called vacant. That was a new addition to the ordinance. But the distressed part of it is something that it came out of that review that you asked for as far as blighted properties. The distressed ones are the ones that we're talking about, that they could be occupied, they could be unoccupied, but it's about, do they have obvious warning signs? There's either exterior problems, or it could be that there's some financial distress happening with fees that are due either from my department or other departments. We're trying to track that collectively across all the different departments. We're going to be having our second meeting with you tomorrow as a group. It's an internal work group where we have all of the departments. I've really been impressed with, maybe it's because I told people you asked for this, but people came out for my meeting. They came out for my meeting, and I
got your back, Bill. Like, this is important.
Power, but not only did they come out, but they came out with some great ideas. And Scott Barker, Scott Duckworth, and our IT team have done a great job with trying to help me pull some of this data together so that it means something more than just the way we were looking at it. I think that's what you were intending. I think we'll see better results because things won't be able to slip through the cracks where we didn't know certain things, that if either a different department might have been tracking some of the same things for different reasons, we've got to be working together on them. That's what's happening now. I'm encouraged by it.
Well, I'm very excited. I'm glad that you were able to bring people together, because the cross-department collaboration here allows us to think differently about an issue. It's almost like making it in 3D versus just from the perspective of one department. Because the thing that I was learning about this Lawrence, Massachusetts case study example is, like many communities across the country for that matter, and especially in the Northeast, there's an aging housing stock. There's various reasons why properties are in varying states and whatnot. And sometimes you can sort of just be a little one note in your approach, right? You sort of, or you can hyper focus on a certain series of known problematic landlords and sort of let other things sort of get deprioritized because you're so focused on this over here. And certain people want to use the entire court process, right? And really draw things out for what can be sometimes years, right? And that can expend limited resources in a very narrow way. So this is a great opportunity, we've been able to open up the conversations and get other perspectives and people at the table, including folks who can, from, for example, our fire department, the fire marshals, who can say these particular either distressed or vacant properties are concerning because we have just worried about the dense nature of a neighborhood and what could happen in that property that could cause like a fire hazard, or bringing some of our finance team in who can talk about where people have been in arrears in terms of property tax payment, and like actually sort of crisscross applesauce, very technical term, bring together a good set of criteria. But like, we're actually going to shift our attention to those where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. So with the ultimate goal of getting properties back online, and back especially into a housing, when we have a housing shortage, back into full-time use and have some more success stories. But speaking of success stories, have you any success stories with any of these particular either distressed or vacant buildings that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, I feel like there's some regular success, but I think closest to where we are right now at 142 Colchester Avenue, the one that comes to mind being, again, close to here, that property about 18 months ago, Councilor Milo Grant reached out to me and said, Bill, can you check on this property? I'm worried. There's a tent that popped up out back. It looks really rugged. It looks like the construction stopped. And neighbors, have spoken to me about it, and she said she had walked by. I did the same thing. It was a construction project that had stopped. The short version is, fast forward that to today when I'm looking for prepping tomorrow's meeting, that property is going to be occupied soon as a fourplex. A new property, I'll say a partner joined that and has applied for maybe a couple $100,000 worth of permit work to make it a denser population. And it went from a distressed and vacant property to be a real productive, it's going to be a great part of this community right here. And it starts with people reaching out to us. So if anyone has a property that they're concerned about, we may or may not be tracking it already. You can always reach out to me personally. I'd be happy to take the calls at 865-7510 is my direct line, and happy to answer if you have a specific question about a particular property. Are you tracking it, Bill? What's the story with it? Some of them are minimally occupied. We don't count them as vacant, but we're watching them carefully and reach out to property owners regularly. But I do like that 142 Colchester, or 142 Archibald Street, correct myself, 142 Archibald Street, because it really went from a community complaint to us reviewing the circumstances, me doing some outreach to the property owner the way the vacant building ordinance requires, and then working with another partner to sort of transition that, and now we've got a much better looking property and something that's going to be better for the neighborhood.
Which is great. And one more plug for your phone number in case people have questions about anything that we've covered today between code enforcement or blighted or distressed properties in general. One more time for your phone number.
The main office number is 863-0442, and my direct line is 865-7510.
And the ever helpful Town Meeting TV has our permanent inspections sort of about page up there that can give you some sense of where to find that on the city's website. And if you happen to be down in Pine Street, you can also stop in. We have customer service folks from DPI as well as DPW in that city office down in the South End. So Bill, thanks for being on my show, department head number 3 or 4. I think this is a great one for folks to know. And again, if you're watching this recorded, you can reach out to that phone number that you just saw up on the screen or at the mayor's office, and we can always forward things off to any relevant department. So thank you all so much again to tuning in to the mayor's show. We will continue to try to do these on a regular basis. And I'm pretty sure our next theme will be Town Meeting Day, believe it or not, which is right around the corner in early March. And we will be coming back to talk about all of our very important ballot questions soon. So thanks all so much for tuning in. Bill, thanks again for being here.
Thank you.